I never thought a single phone call could change everything. But when my daughter Jessica hung up on me that Tuesday afternoon, something inside me finally cracked open. Not broke, mind you. Cracked open like an egg, letting something new and fierce emerge from decades of careful containment. The call came while I was sitting in my favorite armchair, the one Harold bought me for our 20th anniversary, massaging my aching hip in preparation for tomorrow's surgery. The replacement had been scheduled for months, and Dr. Martinez had been very clear about the recovery time. 3 weeks of complete bed rest, then slowly building back my mobility. At 74, I wasn't bouncing back like I used to. When the phone rang, I expected it to be one of the nurses from the hospital, confirming my pre-op instructions. Instead, I heard Jessica's voice, sweet as honey at first, asking about my surgery, expressing concern. For a moment, my heart lifted. Maybe this time would be different. Maybe my daughter actually cared. Then she got to the point. She and Mark had this incredible opportunity, she said. A meeting with investors that could change their lives forever. They needed someone to watch Lily for the week. And naturally, they thought of me. After all, what else did I have to do while I was recovering? I explained about the surgery, about the doctor's orders, about how I wouldn't even be able to walk to the bathroom on my own for the first few days. The silence on the other end stretched like a taut wire. When Jessica spoke again, her voice had transformed completely. Gone was the saccharine sweetness, replaced by something cold and sharp as winter wind. She told me exactly what she thought of my excuses. She reminded me of every sacrifice she claimed to have made. Every dollar I owed her for her childhood. Every way I had apparently failed her as a mother. Then came the threat that would echo in my mind for weeks afterward. If I couldn't do this one simple thing for her, she said, I shouldn't expect to see a penny of support from them when I got really old and helpless, and I certainly shouldn't bother calling them anymore. The line went dead, leaving me staring at the phone in my lap like it had just burst into flames. I wasn't hurt exactly. I was something else entirely, something I hadn't felt in years. I was angry. The next morning arrived gray and drizzling, matching my mood as Harold's old friend drove me to the hospital. The surgery went smoothly, according to Dr. Martinez, though I felt like I'd been hit by a truck when I woke up in recovery. The pain medication made everything feel distant and cottony, but not distant enough to miss Mark's arrival that afternoon. He didn't bring flowers or get-well cards. He brought a manila folder stuffed with legal documents and a pen that he kept clicking nervously as he settled into the visitor's chair. Through the fog of medication, I watched him arrange papers on my bedside table with the focused intensity of a predator. Power of attorney, he explained in his smoothest voice. Just a temporary measure to help manage my bills while I recovered. Purely practical. Nothing to worry about. He'd already spoken to a lawyer friend who assured him it was all perfectly standard for elderly patients undergoing major surgery. Even drugged and exhausted, I recognized the trap. Harold had been an accountant for 40 years, and he'd taught me enough about financial documents to know danger when I saw it. This wasn't temporary, and it wasn't about helping me pay my electric bill. This was about control. I swept the papers off the table with more force than I thought I had in me. They scattered across the linoleum floor like fallen leaves. Mark's carefully composed expression cracked, revealing something ugly underneath. "Get out," I told him. The words came from somewhere deep and primal, a place I'd kept locked away for decades. "Get out of my room right now." That's when Sophia arrived, my dearest friend since Harold's funeral 3 years ago. She took one look at Mark scrambling to collect his scattered documents, and at my face, flushed with righteous anger despite the pain, and understood immediately. Sophia had never liked Mark, had never been shy about expressing her opinion of him. She'd called him a parasite more than once, though never when Jessica was around. Now she didn't bother with diplomacy. She told him exactly what she thought of men who preyed on vulnerable elderly women, using language that would have made a sailor blush. Mark left quickly after that, his folder clutched against his chest like armor. Sophia stayed, holding my hand while I cried angry tears into my hospital pillow. She didn't offer empty comfort or suggest that maybe I'd misunderstood his intentions. She just sat with me in my fury and let me feel it fully for the first time in years. The ride home 3 days later felt like traveling through a foreign country. Everything looked the same but felt different somehow. Like I was seeing my neighborhood through new eyes. The house Harold and I had bought as newlyweds 45 years ago seemed smaller, quieter, full of shadows and memories that no longer comforted me. I made my way slowly to Harold's old study, using my walker to navigate around furniture that suddenly felt like obstacles. His desk sat exactly as he'd left it, covered with the organized chaos of a man who never threw anything away. I'd been meaning to go through his papers for years, but had never found the courage. Grief had a way of making everything feel too precious to disturb, but something had shifted in me during those hospital days. Maybe it was Sophia's fierce loyalty, or maybe it was seeing Mark's true face without the mask of false concern. Whatever it was, I felt ready to face whatever Harold had left behind. The safe was hidden behind a painting of the lake where we'd honeymooned, its combination the date of our first kiss. Inside, along with our important documents and my grandmother's jewelry, I found Harold's personal notebook. He'd always been a meticulous record keeper, but this was different. This was personal. Page after page documented every loan, every gift, every financial favor we'd extended to Jessica and Mark over the years. Harold's careful handwriting tracked thousands of dollars, from Jessica's college tuition that she'd never finished paying back, to the down payment on their first house, to the endless series of emergency loans for Mark's failed business ventures. But it was Harold's final entry, dated just a month before his heart attack, that made my breath catch in my throat. In his familiar script, he'd written a message clearly meant for me. Ellie, protect what we built together. Don't let misplaced love destroy our legacy. Underneath the notebook, I found something that made my stomach turn. Bank statements for a credit card I'd given Jessica for emergencies only. While I'd been grieving Harold's death, while I'd been struggling with loneliness and medical bills, they'd been using that card for luxury vacations and designer shopping sprees. Hawaii, Las Vegas, department stores I couldn't even afford to window shop in. The betrayal cut deeper than any physical pain I'd ever experienced. This wasn't just about money. This was about trust, about the fundamental assumption that your children want what's best for you, not what's best for themselves at your expense. I called Arthur Chen, Harold's lawyer and our friend for over 20 years, the next morning. Arthur had always been kind to me, patient with my questions about insurance and investments after Harold died. But when I spread those bank statements across his desk and told him about Mark's hospital visit, his usually gentle demeanor hardened into something formidable. Within an hour, Arthur had contacted my bank. Every credit card in Jessica's name was canceled. Every automatic transfer was stopped. Every financial connection between my accounts and theirs was severed with surgical precision. Arthur worked with the efficiency of a man who'd seen this scenario play out too many times before, and his anger on my behalf was both comforting and validating. I was at home, practicing walking with my new hip, when the first call came. Jessica's voice was shrill with panic and embarrassment. She'd been trying to pay for lunch at an expensive restaurant downtown when her card was declined. Not just declined, but cut up by the waiter in front of her business associates. What did I think I was doing? She demanded. How could I humiliate her like this? Didn't I realize this was sabotaging her important meeting, potentially ruining her future? I listened to her tirade with a calm that surprised me. When she finally ran out of accusations and demands, I spoke with a voice I barely recognized as my own. Steady, clear, unbending. The card was in my name, I told her. The account was mine. The debt was mine. And now, the decision was mine too. I hung up before she could respond. Something I'd never done to my daughter in 42 years of her life. The silence that followed was both terrifying and liberating. Later that week, while I was slowly rebuilding my strength with physical therapy, Arthur called with news that chilled my blood. Jessica and Mark had filed a petition with the county court, requesting legal guardianship over me. They claimed I was suffering from post-surgical dementia, that I was no longer capable of managing my own affairs. that my recent financial decisions proved I needed protection from my own diminished mental capacity. The irony was breathtaking. The same people who'd been systematically draining my accounts for years were now claiming to be concerned about my financial welfare. The same daughter who'd threatened to abandon me was now positioning herself as my devoted caregiver. Arthur assured me that their petition was legally weak, built on speculation rather than medical evidence, but it was also a declaration of war. And wars required strategy. The court-appointed social worker arrived on a Thursday morning, clipboard in hand and skepticism in her eyes. I'd spent the previous day preparing, laying out Harold's notebook, my medical records, my financial statements, and a timeline of recent events that Arthur had helped me compile. Mrs. Patterson was younger than I'd expected, probably in her 40s, with tired eyes that suggested she'd seen too much human selfishness in her career. She asked careful questions about my daily routines, my medication management, my understanding of my financial situation. I answered each one clearly and thoroughly, watching her expression shift from dutiful professionalism to genuine interest. When Jessica and Mark arrived for their scheduled interview, the contrast was stark. They interrupted each other constantly, contradicted their own statements, and focused entirely on my supposed incompetence, rather than any genuine concern for my well-being. Mark's charm, so effective in casual social situations, fell flat under Mrs. Patterson's professional scrutiny. Sophia arrived as my character witness, and her testimony was devastating in its simple honesty. She described Mark's hospital ambush, Jessica's financial demands, and the systematic isolation they'd attempted to impose on me. She spoke about our friendship, about the book club we belonged to, about my volunteer work at the literacy center before my hip problems began. By the time Mrs. Patterson left, I knew we'd won. Her recommendation to the court was swift and unambiguous. The guardianship petition was not only denied but flagged as potentially fraudulent. Jessica and Mark were warned about providing false information to court officials and advised to seek legal counsel if they wished to pursue further action. They didn't pursue further action. But my 10-year-old granddaughter Lily did something that broke my heart and steeled my resolve in equal measure. She called me on her tablet late one evening, whispering so her parents wouldn't hear. She'd overheard them talking about how I was getting old and confused, how I might not remember her anymore. She wanted to know if it was true. The vulnerability in her small voice, the fear that her grandmother might disappear into the fog of old age, reminded me that this battle wasn't just about money or pride. It was about protecting the one person in my family who'd ever loved me unconditionally. I spent the next month working with Arthur on a new will, one that reflected my true values and intentions, rather than my former desperate hope that generosity might eventually earn love. The document was comprehensive and unambiguous. My house, my savings, my investments, everything Harold and I had built together would go into a trust fund for Lily's education and future. Arthur would manage the trust until she turned 25, ensuring the money would be used for her benefit, rather than her parents' immediate gratification. A substantial portion of my estate would go to the women's shelter, where I'd started volunteering after my recovery, helping other women escape situations where they'd lost themselves in service to others. The irony wasn't lost on me that I was learning to help other people set boundaries while finally learning to set my own. Jessica and Mark would inherit exactly $1 each, along with a letter explaining my reasoning, not out of spite but out of honesty. They'd made their priorities clear, and I was finally responding in kind. The meeting in Arthur's office was scheduled for a Friday afternoon in late autumn. I chose not to attend, partly because I wanted to avoid the drama, but mostly because I'd said everything I needed to say in my letter. Arthur would handle the legal formalities. I would handle my own emotional closure. From what Arthur told me later, their reactions were as predictable as they were ugly. Mark's fury, Jessica's tears, their threats of legal challenges that we all knew would go nowhere. They left with their copies of the will and my letter, and I never heard from them again. The letter I'd written was perhaps the most honest communication I'd ever had with my daughter. I told her that her inheritance reflected the relationship she'd chosen to build with me, I told her that love couldn't be bought with money or secured through financial dependency. I told her that I hoped she'd learn to value relationships over transactions before it was too late to build something real with her own daughter. But mostly, I told her that I was finally choosing to protect what Harold and I had created, just as he'd asked me to do. Spring came early that year, and with it, a lightness I hadn't felt in decades. I sold the big house with its heavy memories and its expensive upkeep, moving instead to a bright apartment in a senior community where independence was celebrated rather than pitied. I had neighbors who became friends, activities that engaged my mind, and for the first time since Harold's death, a sense of purpose that didn't depend on other people's approval. Lily came to stay with me regularly now, court-ordered visitation that had become the highlight of my weeks. Her parents' marriage had crumbled under financial pressure and mutual blame, leading to a custody arrangement that gave me significant time with my granddaughter. She was thriving away from their toxic atmosphere, her natural intelligence and curiosity flowering in the calm stability I could now provide. On a warm Saturday morning in May, Lily and I were working in the small garden plot behind my apartment building, planting tomatoes and herbs for our summer meals. Her hands were dirty with soil, her face bright with concentration as she carefully arranged seeds in neat rows. "Grandma Eleanor," she said suddenly, using the formal name she'd adopted since coming to live with me part-time. "Are you happy now?" The question caught me off guard with its directness and wisdom. I sat back on my heels, looking at this remarkable child who'd somehow retained her capacity for love, despite everything she'd witnessed. "Yes, sweetheart," I told her. "I'm happy now. And you know why? Because I finally learned that it's okay to protect the people you love, even when one of those people is yourself." She nodded solemnly, as if this made perfect sense to her 10-year-old mind. Then she went back to planting seeds with the focused determination of someone building something important and lasting. Watching her work, I realized that my story wasn't really about cutting ties or seeking revenge. It was about learning, after 7 decades of life, that love without boundaries isn't love at all. It's enabling. It's fear disguised as generosity. It's the slow erosion of self-respect in service to relationships that exist only because one person gives everything and asks for nothing in return. The woman I'd been before that phone call would have continued giving until there was nothing left, would have died broken, convinced that her sacrifice was proof of her virtue. The woman I'd become understood that true love requires mutual respect, that healthy relationships need boundaries, and that protecting what matters most sometimes means disappointing people who've never learned to appreciate what they have. That evening, as Lily helped me prepare dinner in my small but cheerful kitchen, I felt something I'd been missing for years without even realizing it. Peace. Not the exhausted peace of giving up, but the energetic peace of finally understanding who I was and what I deserved. The past couldn't be changed, but the future stretched ahead, full of possibilities I was finally free to explore. I had a granddaughter to guide, friendships to nurture, and a life to live on my own terms. At 74, I was finally ready to begin.